Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. We have some breaking news. UFC 291, the entire main card has been announced. The main event is Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje 2 for the BMF belt, which is absolutely disgusting. We're going to talk about that more in depth later in the video, and the real reason the UFC is putting the BMF belt on the line, because it's something that I don't think a lot of people know. And it's also something that I've barely seen anybody even mention in regards to this fight announcement. But we're going to look at the entire fight card. I'm going to react to the entire fight card. I'm going to give my early prediction for every fight on the main card that was just announced. And also we're going to talk about that BMF belt later in the video. And I might actually make a dedicated video on that. So before I get into anything, I've already done a video on Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley being the main event of UFC 292. I'll link that down in the description. And also, I did an entire video on the Francis Ngannou PFL contract situation today. I'll link that down in the description as well if you guys want to go check that out. But the main event of UFC 291, Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje. I have no problem with this being a main event. Absolutely love this fight. This is an incredible stylistic matchup of two top-ranked guys. I mean, when is Dustin Poirier ever in a boring fight? His last fight against Michael Chandler, amazing. The fight before that was a title shot against Charles Oliveira, amazing fight. The fights before that against Conor McGregor, amazing fights. Dustin Poirier is never in a boring fight. Then you go over to Justin Gaethje. Justin Gaethje, never in a boring fight either. I mean, Justin Gaethje is one of the most exciting fighters I've ever seen in MMA. And a lot of people thought he was going to lose to Rafael Fiziev. I even picked against him, but I thought he had a very good chance at winning. He went out there, beat Rafael Fiziev. And this is the matchup everyone wanted to see. I know a lot of people are complaining and tired. Oh, the top guys in the division are always fighting each other on repeat. Nobody's giving guys, up-and-coming guys a chance. Well, Justin Gaethje gave Rafael Fiziev a chance. He beat Rafael Fiziev. And now I think this is the fight to make. And this could be a number one contender fight. If Beneil Dariush loses to Charles Oliveira at UFC 289, this will be the number one contender fight. The winner of this fight will fight Islam Makhachev as long as they're able to, because it will be a relatively quick turnaround, 3-month turnaround till the end of October, which who knows how this fight goes. They might not be able to make a quick turnaround. But I absolutely love this main event. I just hate the BMF belt. Why are we doing this cringy, corny BMF WWE style belt? Jorge Masvidal retired with a belt that he could never lose. So now we're making a new BMF belt. This is corny. This is cringy. This is WWE-esque. And the fight does not need it. There's a reason why they did it. I'm going to talk about it later. But I feel like they could have found a way to do it without it. I absolutely hate the BMF belt. And for me, you take a really good fight, and then Dana White just took a shit on it. And that's what I feel like with this BMF belt. And I love that this fight is 5 rounds. I love that this fight is a main event. I don't have a problem with this being a non-title main event. Doesn't matter that there's not a lightweight title on the line. Doesn't matter that there's not a title on the line. The BMF belt adds nothing to it. This is a great matchup between two top lightweights who are two of the most exciting fighters in UFC history and MMA history. And we got to throw a fake belt on there. We got to give these guys a participation trophy just because the UFC doesn't want to headline an event without a belt on the top of the card. An embarrassment. As far as an early prediction for this matchup, this is a tough one to pick. I believe in the initial matchup I picked Justin Gaethje, and I feel like Justin Gaethje has evolved so much since then. He looked so good against Rafael Fiziev. But I just think Dustin Poirier's boxing is a little bit cleaner. I think he has a little bit better fight IQ. And I'm going to go Dustin Poirier for an early prediction. But as we get closer to this fight, I will do a full breakdown and prediction. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss that. And this is honestly right around the corner. We're already at mid-May. We're 2.5 months away from this fight. And I'm really looking forward to this matchup. I do think it has massive ramifications in the division. And I think it would have been an absolute travesty if this fight was not 5 rounds. If they made Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje and it was not 5 rounds, that would have been an absolute travesty. Moving on to the other fights on the card, the co-main event, Jan Blachowicz versus Alex Pereira at light heavyweight. I love this matchup, but I hate this matchup at the same time. Because when I first saw this, when Dana White did his live stream, he brought up the graphic, and I saw this. The first thought that came into my mind, well, there goes Alex Pereira's career. His career is over. Jan Blachowicz is an elite level striker, is an above average grappler, is a massive light heavyweight, and he has nasty, brutal KO power, the legendary Polish power. And then you have Alex Pereira, who's an elite level striker, has crazy power, but that's where it ends. That's where it ends. And he just got flatline KO'd at UFC 287. I wanted him to take the rest of the year off. And instead, now he's fighting Jan Blachowicz 3 months after he gets flatlined, basically, or 4 months, I guess, basically. I think that's too quick of a turnaround. I understand he's moving up in weight. He doesn't have to cut all the weight to 185. Maybe that helps his chin. But the way he got flatlined by Israel Adesanya in his last fight, and now he's fighting Jan Blachowicz, who has unbelievable KO power, plus the fact that Jan Blachowicz has that grappling in his back pocket, plus Jan Blachowicz, great leg kicks as well, heavy leg kicks. I just think this is a nightmare matchup for Alex Pereira. I do think he can win the fight. Jan Blachowicz is getting old. He can get hit. He can get KO'd himself. Plus, what is Pereira going to look like at 205? He may be an entirely new man, not having to cut all that weight. But honestly, early prediction for this fight, I love the matchup. I wish it was later down the line. I wish this was like November. I hate that he's returning so soon from a flatline KO. Early prediction, I have to go Jan Blachowicz by KO. And even if Jan's losing on the feet, he can take him down. I mean, look what he did to Adesanya. He took Adesanya down, out-grappled him, dominated him on the ground. Jan Blachowicz did. And Adesanya out-grappled Alex Pereira in the first MMA fight. So, and Jan Blachowicz is a much better grappler than Israel Adesanya, plus the size differential between the two in terms of Blachowicz and Adesanya. I just think this fight is a recipe for disaster. But I do believe the UFC is doing this because if Alex Pereira wins, he's right in line for a title shot. If he beats Jan Blachowicz, who's coming off a title shot himself, was a draw, Alex Pereira wins this fight, he's probably getting a title shot. You do Jamal Hill versus Yuri Prochazka, Alex Pereira KOs Jan Blachowicz, he's in line for a title shot. Then meanwhile, if Adesanya continues to win at middleweight, maybe one fight, maybe Adesanya says, you know what, I want to go up to 205. Imagine Pereira gets a hold of the belt. And I think Pereira versus Jamal Hill and Pereira versus Prochazka are more manageable matchups than Jan Blachowicz, in my opinion. I thought they were going to give Pereira Johnny Walker. I thought they were going to sacrifice Johnny Walker and his chin to Alex Pereira. Instead, they're booking him against Jan Blachowicz, who's getting old, but I still think it is a terrible matchup for Alex Pereira. I'm going Jan Blachowicz via KO. Moving down the card, the other fight that was announced, the featured fight on the card, Paulo Costa versus Ikram Aliskerov. What a fight. I love the fight, but it's kind of weird matchmaking considering Ikram, has the one fight in the UFC at UFC 288. He beat Phil Hawes, and now he's fighting Paulo Costa, who's ranked in the top 10 of the middleweight division. A little bit strange, but I do love the matchmaking. I'm not a big believer in the rankings. Bunch of unknown people make the rankings. And Paulo Costa supposedly just signed a new deal. Who knows? Some of these fights may come out and they may say, I didn't sign this bout agreement. UFC could have been rushing to make these announcements. But at the same time, Paulo Costa, he's coming off a win over Luke Rockhold. Supposedly was supposed to fight Khamzat Chimaev. Obviously, that's not happening now. Where does that leave Khamzat Chimaev is the real question. He must be fighting Kamaru Usman would be my guess, but I don't know. Maybe they're having him wait around to see if Costa wins this fight. I don't know. But this is a massive step up for Ikram Aliskerov. To come off a win over Phil Hawes, it's a whole different beast against Paulo Costa. But in my opinion, Costa didn't look that good against Luke Rockhold in his last fight. And Luke Rockhold is at the tail end of his career on the decline. Just lost to Mike Perry at BKFC. That really puts it into perspective. So Ikram can win this fight and then put himself right into title contention. And I do believe the reason the UFC are doing these certain middleweight matchups, Sean Strickland versus Abus Magomedov, and now the Ikram Aliskerov versus Paulo Costa matchup, is because of the lack of contenders at middleweight. They're trying to kind of fast track some new contenders at middleweight because supposedly Adesanya is fighting the winner of Whitaker versus Dricus du Plessis at 290. And it's most likely going to be Whitaker, so it's the Whitaker trilogy. Then after that, there's nothing for Adesanya. So the UFC is kind of making these moves. Okay, we'll have Ikram waiting in the wings, maybe Abus, build up some other contenders potentially as well. We got Paul Craig making his way into the middleweight division. Not that I'm saying that that's going to happen. But I think the reason the UFC is doing this is the same reason they did it with Alex Pereira, to try to get these guys into the top 10 so that, they can have interesting, new, compelling contenders for Israel Adesanya. As far as an early prediction for this, Aliskerov didn't look that good early against Phil Hawes, but then he brutally KO'd him, caught him with a head kick, then a 1-2 and slept him. I think this is a winnable fight for Ikram, but I'm not ready to pick him just yet. I have to revisit that when we get closer. I got to go Paulo Costa. I have no idea the method of victory. Maybe Paulo Costa TKO, but that's just an early prediction for now. I just think Costa, we know more about him. We've seen him fight more quality opponents, and it's hard for me right off the jump to say I'm picking Ikram off a win over Phil Hawes. It's hard for me to say that, even though Paulo Costa didn't look particularly great against Luke Rockhold. Moving down the card, Tony Ferguson versus Bobby Green. The dead corpse of Tony Ferguson versus Bobby Green. Tony Ferguson on a 5-fight losing streak. Bobby Green, he got a KO over Jarrett Gordon in his last fight, but he headbutted him. That caused the KO, so he didn't get the win. I don't necessarily hate this fight. I hate to see Tony still fighting. He just got a DUI recently, crashed his truck. But if he's going to fight someone, I'm much happier that he's fighting a guy like Bobby Green, where at least there's a chance Tony Ferguson wins this fight. But sometimes Bobby Green shows up and looks like the elite of the elite. Other times he looks terrible. Tony Ferguson looked horrible against Nate Diaz, but he took the fight with Li Jingliang on 3 weeks' notice, and then he took the fight against Nate Diaz on 24 hours' notice. So I don't want to hold it against him too much, but he's clearly on the decline. He's taken a lot of damage. The Bobby Green fight is winnable, and, I don't know. I don't know who to pick in this fight, honestly. It's the dead corpse of Tony Ferguson versus Bobby Green. I don't have an early prediction for this fight. But at least if Tony Ferguson's fighting someone, he's not fighting anyone in the rankings. They're not sacrificing him to Paddy Pimblett, which I'm not even sure Paddy Pimblett would win that fight. But still, there's a chance, and that scares me. So I don't mind the matchmaking. And I'm always happy to see Tony Ferguson hopefully get a win, even though I'm not sure that that's going to happen. I'm leaning Bobby Green right now for an early prediction if you have to pin me down for one. But this fight is just kind of, it is what it is. Honestly, I'm not particularly excited about it. I don't hate it. I don't love it. Moving down the card, Michael Chiesa versus Kevin Holland. This fight makes perfect sense. Michael Chiesa, lost his last fight against Sean Brady, but he was winning the 3rd round. Had it been a 5-round fight, he might have won. Michael Chiesa, very good grappler. Kevin Holland having issues with grapplers, but he's coming off the win over Santiago Ponzinibbio. Stopped him in the 3rd round. Before that, brutally mauled by Khamzat Chimaev. I think this is perfect matchmaking. I like this fight. I think this fight could go either way. And I'm leaning Michael Chiesa because I do believe that Michael Chiesa has the takedown threat and the grappling advantage over Kevin Holland. I know Kevin Holland moved down to 170, and maybe he has a little bit more of an advantage there in terms of the grappling and being able to defend some of these guys. And Michael Chiesa has garbage striking, so maybe Kevin Holland can take advantage of him on the feet. But right now, early prediction, I go Michael Chiesa. I think he'll be able to out-grapple him, take him down, control him a little bit. But I love the fight. I love the matchmaking there, and that's a perfect fight to open up the main card. And also, they have announced for this fight card, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Michel Pereira. That was moved off. I forgot what card that was on, but that was moved off as well. Apparently, that's back on UFC 291, according to MMAfighting.com. Love that matchup. Going with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. I think he's a far better striker. I'm pretty locked in on that pick. I'm not a big believer in Michel Pereira. Dude lost to Diego Sanchez by throwing an illegal knee. Gassed out in his fight before the Diego Sanchez fight. He's on like a 4 or 5 fight winning streak right now, but he hasn't fought anyone the level of Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And I think Wonderboy Thompson will go out there and be able to outstrike him on the feet like he did against Kevin Holland in a masterclass performance by Wonderboy Thompson. So overall, 291 is a stacked card. The only gripe I have is that BMF belt. Why are they doing the BMF belt? I'm going to answer that question right now. But first off, I also want to mention the reason Dana White and the UFC were so, rushed getting this UFC 291 announcement out, as well as UFC 292, Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley, is because Francis Ngannou signed with the PFL today. The UFC and Dana White is petty, and they wanted to overshadow the news by announcing this. And I think it's going to work partially. But at the end of the day, Ngannou signed his contract. He signed his contract. It's irrelevant, but it is kind of a petty move by the UFC. But the reason they put the BMF belt on the line for this fight is because there is a theory that the UFC, in their contractual obligations to ESPN, they must have a title fight headlining a pay-per-view card. And I know someone's going to say, well, they've had non-title fights headlining cards before. Yes, they have. They did Khamzat Chimaev versus Kevin Holland, and that was thrown together last minute, but it was originally Khamzat Chimaev versus Nate Diaz. I believe there is an exception for massive fights. And when I say massive fights, I mean Conor McGregor fights, Khamzat versus Nate Diaz, a Nate Diaz fight. And I also believe that they are not able to do it with a fight like Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje. I don't think they're able to then say, oh, well, this is just as good as a Conor McGregor fight, because it's not. In terms of pay-per-view sales, they also did it with Colby Covington versus Jorge Masvidal, but Masvidal was the star and drawing power there. So I think the UFC's like, well, we have this novelty BMF belt that Jorge Masvidal left behind, when he left to go be a congressman. Why not throw it on the line here? And then that way we have our contractual obligations. We have a promotional belt to promote this fight card. And essentially, we don't have to do any further negotiating with ESPN, and we're meeting our contractual obligations. I believe that is the reason the BMF belt is on the line. And I heard someone mention this recently. MMA-I, a YouTube channel named MMA-I, he did a video on Francis Ngannou's contract situation. I'll link that video down in the description. It's an hour-and-a-half video. It's an amazing video. But he mentioned that in that video where the UFC is basically handcuffed into putting title fights for the headliner of pay-per-views with their deal in place with ESPN, and I believe that's exactly what's going on here. And nobody's mentioning that at all, very rarely in the MMA media landscape. It's one of those things where I understand why they're doing it, but for me, it's just too WWE style for me. It's too WWE style. I'm not a big fan of it. I hate the BMF belt. I hate it when they did it for Nate Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal. But I was like, okay, it's just a novelty. They're going to do it one time. You're essentially giving a belt to someone that they can never lose it. They can never lose that belt. I mean, Jorge Masvidal got 50-45 by Kamaru Usman, got KO'd by Kamaru Usman, got 50-45 by Colby Covington. But yeah, he retired, so he left the BMF belt vacant. And don't get me wrong, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, both savages. If you guys want to call them BMF belts, that's fine. I think it's corny, but it's fine. They're both savages, two of the most exciting fighters in the UFC. But this is just totally unnecessary. It waters down the product. It makes it WWE-esque. And, if you enjoy fake belts, what's next? Are we going to have hardcore belts too? Let somebody come out from under the cage with a shillelagh and smack Dustin Poirier over the head, and then, Justin Gaethje Herb Dean can wave off the fight and say, oh, it's over. Are we going to start hitting people with steel chairs? We're going to start putting fighters through tables? Is that what we're going to do now? Just fake belt after fake belt. And this is a slippery slope. Okay, one time is, okay, whatever. It's not the greatest, but okay. Now you're doing it a second time? You think this is going to be the end of this? No. It's going to happen again. And it's going to happen again, and it's going to be very unfortunate, and it's going to be very disgusting, and I absolutely hate the BMF belt, and I'm thinking about doing an entire dedicated video on it. Let me know down in the comments if that's something you want me to make or not. And that's pretty much it for this video. I went over the entire UFC 291 main card. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.